In today's episode, I sit down with my good friend and fellow naturopathic doctor, Moshe Daniel Block. Moshe has a vast amount of knowledge in mind-body medicine and even cured himself from an autoimmune condition called Myasthenia Gravis. Join us as we discuss the importance of suffering and the necessity of self-expression, as well as what it means to be light in action and the concerns that he has about the naturopathic profession and how it has been changing over the years. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our show. And today I talk with a colleague of mine, a good friend, Dr. Moshe Daniel Block. And I had a really fun conversation with Moshe. And we had a candid conversation about a lot of different topics in health, and particularly mind-body medicine and what's going on in the profession at this point in time. One thing that was really interesting is Moshe had a condition known as Myasthenia Gravis, and that's an autoimmune condition that essentially affects the way that his muscles can contract. So you can learn more about that if you're interested, but it's quite a severe condition, and he actually found a way to move through that and actually cured himself of the condition known as Myasthenia Gravis. And when you have a condition like that and you're not getting answers, it really sets you on a journey. And you really do start to go on a journey to try and figure out like what is actually required, what is really needed to get true healing. And so he embarked on that journey, shares with us some of the insights that he developed around that and what really helped him to heal. And so in this episode, we talk about a lot of different things, but we talk about the importance of suffering and where suffering actually plays in as an essential aspect to healing. We talk about the importance of self-expression, what it means to be light in action, sort of living from that authentic part of yourself. And then a lot of times when we're not living from that place, we can even set the stage up for illness to develop. And we talked too about he's actually written a book around the revolution of naturopathic medicine, remaining true to our philosophy. And so he talks about changes that he's not too happy about that's going on in the naturopathic profession and where he thinks we're kind of moving and what he thinks we need to do. So we have a really fun conversation and lots of insights. There's lots of great information there. I mean, we talk about a lot of different aspects of even what's going on today too. So tune in and let us know what you think. And now I'd also like to share with you a way that you can supercharge your C60. So if you started taking that incredibly powerful antioxidant carbon 60 from Purple Power, also known as fullerenes, one way that you can supercharge it is to incorporate it with intermittent fasting. So we know that C60 is a really powerful antioxidant, and it essentially helps us to mitigate free radical load on the body. That's that oxidative stress, that rusting effect that takes place. It causes us to age and things to break down. It also helps to mitigate a lot of inflammation, and which are really cornerstones for a lot of disease. So one thing that I've been doing now is I will take C60 first thing in the morning, and I'll take 1 or 2 teaspoons of it, and then I will fast for a chunk of time. Now, if anybody's familiar with intermittent fasting, I think the easiest way to do it is to incorporate more of a 6 to 8 hour eating window. So basically fast, say, finish your meals by no later than, say, 7 o'clock. So once you come around, back to 7 in the morning, that's 12 hours. Wait another 4 hours to 6 hours, and then you're going to start to eat, okay? So somewhere around maybe 12 o'clock or somewhere like that, maybe anywhere between 11 till 1 o'clock. And then you have, so essentially what it means is skip breakfast, have dinner, go fast all through the night, skip breakfast. All you would have in the morning would be your fullerene. So you'd have your C60 in the morning. Now, the one that I'm using right at the moment is I use the MCT with the C60 in it. So MCTs are also a really powerful booster for helping to get that fat burning metabolism going, and it assists with intermittent fasting in some ways. So give that a try and let me know how you find it. Now, it doesn't have to be the MCT oil. MCT oils are just a good oil to use when you're fasting. But essentially, if you have a little bit of any oil, whether that's the organic avocado oil or the organic olive oil, basically when you are in a fasted state, when you wake up in the morning, your body is essentially in a fat burning metabolism, especially once things have gotten going and your body learns how to start to adapt and burn fat for fuel. So when you wake up in the morning, you should be in a fat burning metabolism because you've burned through all of your glucose, you've burned through all of your storage glycogen. So now you're starting to use fat. Now, if you give yourself only a little bit of fat, like something from the MCT oils in the C60 or the avocado or the olive oil, then essentially you're not really pushing yourself out of fat burning metabolism. Your body will just burn up that little bit of fat and then still stay in a fat burning metabolism. Also, I find having a little bit of oil like that in the morning also satiates and makes it easier to fast for a longer period of time. The key is that you don't have glucose, is that you don't have sugar of some sort. So whether that's grains or carbohydrates of any sort, or even too much protein at all, as soon as you start to have that, that starts to take you out of fat burning metabolism and moves you more back into a sugar metabolism. And a lot of times the goal with intermittent fasting is to really train the body to become more fat adaptive. So you want to be able to learn how to retrain your body to burn fat as a fuel more effectively. So incorporate that, because also when you're fasting, you light up certain pathways in the body. So there's a pathway called an NRF2 pathway, and that pathway naturally starts to upregulate again, making more antioxidants. It helps to decrease inflammation, and it helps to upregulate liver detoxification pathways. So just by incorporating fasting, you can trigger those, and then you get that plus all of the super powerful effects of C60, and I think that's a real recipe for success. So try that out and let me know what you think. Okay. I hope you enjoy this show with Dr. Moshe, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.
Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges, and we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And today we have Dr. Moshe Daniel Block. And Moshe graduated from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto, Ontario in 2000. It was, I think, 2 years before I graduated. And he is the author of The Revolution of Naturopathic Medicine, Remaining True to Our Philosophy, a book that he published in 2004 about the philosophy and practice of naturopathic medicine, and Holistic Counseling, Introducing the VIS Dialogue, a book about a groundbreaking healing method uniting the worlds of mind-body medicine and psychology in 2016. Dr. Block then went on to complete the Homeopathic Master Clinician's course with Lou Klein in 2003. He specializes in autoimmune illnesses and Myasthenia Gravis, a disease he was personally diagnosed as having and from which he has healed himself. He teaches mind-body medicine and Physician Heal Thyself in his full certification program called Holistic Counseling Course for NDs and other healthcare professionals, and I'll have the links to that in the show notes. Moshe, what a privilege to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Jason. It's so nice also to reconnect with you in this fashion. You know, like 20 somewhat years ago, we were at CCNM, and now here, where we are now. It's an interesting perspective on life and how things unfold.
Oh, that's for sure. You know the memories that, I mean, other than I remember going to school with, you were, I think, 2 years ahead of me. Your sister was 1 year ahead of me, and I knew Alana quite well back in the day. And what I remember most, actually, I remember you specifically, because at that time we were living down around Yonge and Eglinton. The college was right at Yonge and Eglinton. And I remember walking back, because I lived just in Yonge and Eglinton. And I'd be coming back, and I would often see you sitting down with your guitar, singing songs with some of the different people that were homeless on the street around that area. And you'd often bring your guitar and open up and sing songs with them. And I always would walk by and think, like, that's a really solid individual right there.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for that memory. You know, I don't remember that specific thing, but I know that I definitely played a lot of guitar, and I would just jam with whoever, and I have had lots of fun with that for sure. Music is a world bridger, no doubt about it. People, yeah. It's a universal language. People sing, or they listen, or they whatever, and it's a nice thing.
Oh, it's huge. And it's like such a, you know, when you look at different cultures across the world, it's also like music is brought into, in a lot of ways, it's tied very much with healing. A lot of people incorporate healing with music and music with healing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've looked into some of the technologies around Nikola Tesla and John Keeley, like healing with vibrational
Yeah.
frequency, right? Like this is a hugely just being tapped field for not just healing, but also for like energy, clean energy, powerful energy. And so I enjoy that as well. All about frequency, the relationship between different notes and what they do in the body, what they do in the different bodies that we inhabit.
hmm
Yeah.
Well, and I'll often say to people too, or I've talked about this on the show before, that, we for such a long time, we've been really focused on things from a biochemical standpoint. And I think that's important. But to me, where the next phase of sort of healing is moving from biochemistry to now to more things like frequency, vibration, energy, intent, magnetism. I think that's where healing of the future is going to be the focus.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think as we evolve, we go further we go further and further away from the big crude shoving around of furniture and more into the gentle and subtle and stillness. Like stillness is the ultimate place, like some masters have spoken about stillness as being the most powerful force, like Walter Russell says, we're so used to creating this violent reaction to move things or create force or energy or product whatever, but stillness is actually the fulcrum point from which all power comes from. And Ramana Maharishi also said that, like, don't, if you want to do something, don't try to do something, like just be still, and it will happen much powerful in a much more powerful way than when we're forcing stuff.
hmm Yeah, well, in so many ways, I think like that's been so ingrained. I was just doing a conversation with somebody about the Silva method, and a big part of that is getting into a certain brainwave state so that you're not so forcing something to happen. It's like more of a yin process as opposed to a yang process. And I think particularly in Western circles, we really value that yang approach on go make things happen, and to
Yeah,
sit back and kind of open up a field for something to take place is a very different aspect.
definitely.
We've interviewed someone named Huna Flash. He's a Lemurian light shaman, and he has some really beautiful things that he says. And one of the things he does, sort of in a prayer, is he'll have to say, "From stillness comes the sound. From sound comes the knowing. From knowing comes the action." And then he'll
Mm.
reverse it: from action comes the knowing. From knowing comes the sound. From sound comes the stillness. And it actually can go either way. So whether
Ah,
you start from stillness or start from action, you eventually can kind of it goes both ways.
oh, that's
And I
cool.
always think that's a really beautiful sort of concept to just sort of sit with and think about for a little bit.
I like that. Yeah, it reminds me of the Buddhist statement, if you will. The thought becomes the word, becomes the deed, becomes the habit, becomes the character.
Yeah.
Yeah, that play for sure. Yeah.
hmm Um,
Mhm.
Moshe, tell us a little bit about your journey. So, I mean, you're really got an very interesting resume. I mean, naturopathic doctor, homeopath, you're an author, you're an inventor, and you were diagnosed with a condition called Myasthenia Gravis that if people don't know, that's a pretty intense autoimmune condition that for the most parts is, quote unquote, incurable. So
Mm.
tell me your story around that, because I can only imagine that there must have been a lot of growth that took place in the process of finding the answers to heal that within yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, the answers did come within myself. The answers came within myself, although I asked the question in many different avenues. I tried many different things. And what really worked for me was this process of self-inquiry and looking at what was underlying the problem. So I got diagnosed in 1995. I was pretty severely paralyzed in my triceps, different muscles, double vision, droopy eyelids. If you know myasthenia gravis, that's kind of the presentation of the systemic symptoms. And I went to this thing called, I actually got accepted to CCNM, and I deferred for a year, and I went to travel, and on the road I came down with these symptoms and I had to come home. Um, and I went to the Options Institute in the Catskills. It's the organization of Barry Neil Kaufman and Samaria Kaufman.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know the story of Sunrise, The Miracle Continues, about the boy who had autism, and he was severe. He was like extremely autistic. He was like no connection with anything. And the parents, like Barry Neil Kaufman and Samaria Kaufman, just sat with him for 2.5 years and just mirrored him for 2.5 years, not taking one day off. And at the end of it, he came out with like being fully functional human being. And this was in the 70s when they were shocking kids and tying them up and putting them in dark closets, terrible stuff. So they also do this work with belief systems. So I had a dialogue, and in the dialogue, the practitioner asks questions. Well, what do you mean by that? How do you feel about that? And I learned this and then have evolved it over my 20 years of practice into my course, holistic counseling. So I was asked the question after one of my answers, well, what makes you think you need to be perfect? That was the question I was asked, and I had never thought about that before. That was a game changer. That was like the pillars of heaven shaking for me, because I had never thought about it. It was a given that I needed to be perfect. That's what I felt at the subconscious level. So it happened with me that the answer was also, the question was also the answer, that I don't need to be. And I had a spontaneous healing right on the moment. I felt my arms getting strong. Chi, that life force just flowed into me. And I felt relieved of this pressure that I'd been putting on myself, believing I needed to be perfect. And in that moment, I learned something that I'll never forget. And it's helped me navigate through the years of, when you're in practice, you get to all kinds of question marks and uncertainties and struggles and difficulties and painful processes. This experience that I had with myself was the guiding light to know, and not doubt. This is something I haven't doubted, that the body reflects what the mind believes. The body is a faithful puppy dog. The cells are passive reflections of the mental emotional field. So when I was believing I needed to be perfect, I was going the internal stupid.
Yeah.
If I wasn't perfect in my own judgment, I was a judge and jury and executioner.
Yeah.
So then I would attack myself. And when I would attack myself, the cells would respond to this self-attack and they would attack themselves. So the body was reflecting what was going on in the mind, and hence autoimmune disease. So I've seen that in most of my cases of autoimmune disease, that the person has some kind of energy turned against themselves, hatred towards themselves, self-loathing, anger, guilt, shame that they're internalizing. I've seen that in most cases as a root cause, because I see the cause as being in the mind. And the other realms that we work in are very complementary, the emotional stuff and the physical, all the good things we do as naturopaths. So that was incredible. And that, was a really good precedent for me. It was before I started naturopathic medicine. So then I went in with that experience. And it's been a guiding light ever since, that experience with Myasthenia Gravis. So that was 24, 25, 6 years ago. Geez, time flies.
I know.
I had another bout. I had a quantum level deeper of the illness. So I had a manifestation about 6 years ago around becoming a father.
Yeah.
That brought up a whole other bag of tricks for me to deal with. And I was sicker than I was 26 years ago. And it was harder to recover. And there were many issues attached to the core of getting sick. So it's like, okay, here's the issue. All right, now I'm going to get better. Well, a teeny bit, and then another issue and another. So karmically, it really called in a lot of stuff for me to look at it myself and to address and to work on.
Yeah. I had a similar kind of an experience like that tied with sort of parenthood and stuff. And so like for people, I think a lot of people are aware of mind-body medicine and how the body and the mind, or how the mind influences the body. And I remember Dr. David Hawkins talking about this in Power versus Force and his levels of consciousness. He said, the mind calibrates at about 400, the body calibrates at about 200. So the
Wow.
mind has a lot more power to influence the body. So if we hold certain thoughts or beliefs in mind, it will absolutely affect the body.
Yes.
And so in my mind too, a lot of illness, it's like a pyramid. I remember interviewing Dr. Amit Goswami, and he would talk about this pyramid. It's sort of like, it's from the more abstract to the more concrete. So you'd move from, areas of like spirit to archetypes to mind to feelings or vital body, and then down to the physical level. And all of these things that happen in this abstract eventually filter down and create the concrete. And we know that if you just think, well, when someone's feeling rage, you create certain different changes physiologically in your body. You create different neurotransmitters, different hormones. I mean, we know that. Candace Pert did
Yes.
a brilliant job of breaking down molecules of emotion. So we see how these things play into it. So I totally agree with you on how important it is to be able to dial in the thoughts and the feelings that take place that then likely precede the physical manifestation of it. For
Right.
me, I remember getting this. I'd be doing osteopathy in the practice, and all of a sudden, my entire left shoulder, arm, hand would go completely numb. Couldn't even feel it. And then I get this deep sort of aching kind of falling down through there. And it would kind of ebb and flow, and it would be there for maybe 20 minutes, then it would disappear, then it would come back. And this had gone on for a while. And, I'm naturopathic doctor and osteopath, and I used to be a registered massage therapist. So it's like I went and I got like all the physical stuff done. I'd get massage, I got osteopathy, I got chiropractic, like all the stuff that should have made sense based on just the physical presentation of it. Nothing was really touching it.
Yeah.
And it's hard for you to assess yourself completely sometimes in that regard. I think from a point of view like you're talking about, when you start to get into asking yourself questions, you can. But at this point, I actually had a friend that came down that practiced in a similar way to I do. And he would do a lot of different different sort of testing with me and stuff, and he went through and basically found certain imbalances in muscles, and then we scanned sort of emotions and thoughts, and he said, where does the emotion and thought that's coming up for you is over responsibility, where does over responsibility fit into your life at this point? And I sat there just like, just got engaged, just bought a house, just moved into the house with my fiance and my new 7-year-old stepson, just changed clinic locations. Like it was like check, 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 check. And what was really fascinating was that I had been working with that for probably about 3 or 4 months with no avail. And then as soon as that dawned on me, it was like literally within about a week, everything just click, click, click back in place, and it disappeared. And to this
Amazing.
day, it's kind of like a check for me. If I start to get that sensation, I know now kind of what it means. And then most of the time, it's not even like I have to do tons with it. I just have to honor the fact that I'm actually feeling something and
Right.
pay attention to it and bring awareness to it. And in my own way, kind of embrace it and not fight with it. And
Yes.
in that process, it often starts to diffuse. There might be some aha moments that come up in that process, but it's really a surrender kind of a process that I found. And then the physical would almost just like disappear. Might have to do a little tweaking, but for the most part, I was amazed at how much. And I've seen that type of thing happen with myself and with patients all the time.
It is amazing. And it astounds me. Like the power of that is to me like up there with the top level of healing that we have access to. I think there
Mhm.
are dimensions even beyond that. Like some people can look into source. Like we're all from source, but they can put themselves right into source and heal right from source. And I don't get that. I'd like to evolve to get that medicine. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Um, but this is a very, very high level of medicine. And I'll often have patients come to me and they'll say, I've tried everything for this condition, but they haven't even they haven't even dipped their toe in the pool of asking themselves questions. They've tried all the things, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. The things that propose, hey, this is good for whatever, ulcerative colitis. This is good for this condition. So things are all often, are considered for conditions because so much of our medicine is condition oriented, outside in approach. This is good for these symptoms. And even though we have these philosophies in naturopathic medicine of treat the whole person, treat the root of the illness, treat each person as an individual, this medicine is not really embraced very much in our profession. I would say rarely.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not being taught very much at all. And less is it being taught. So that's a bit of a shame for our profession. But thank goodness there are some who are holding the torch, you know, and because I think it's very important on an evolutionary process. So illness coalesces around an issue that a person has karmically that they don't understand about themselves. So if that's the thing that is coalescing into their physical or mental emotional suffering, that's what they have to work on in that given time in their life. If we find ways to alleviate patients of their illness without them understanding what led to it, I think we're doing a disservice. It's a form of harm in a way as well.
Yeah, I've thought about that exact same scenario as well. And I remember having a conversation once, and I was at a Abraham Hicks. I don't know if you're
Oh,
familiar with
cool.
them, but
Yeah.
we went as a family, my wife and I and the kids, and we went and we were out there, and there's like about 1,000 people there, and they bring people up to the hot seat to ask specific questions, and I had a list of questions, and during that period of time that we were there for about 5 days, I got to come up twice out of the audience to go and ask specific questions.
That's awesome. That's
And
fun.
so I asked specifically around that in some regard, like my true intent was, I'm a naturopathic doctor, sort of functional medicine, integrative doctor. It's like, but I'm ultimately really not wanting to do harm. I really don't want to do harm. And in
Yeah.
some ways, even when I'm looking from a larger perspective, almost like what you're saying, like the lessons and how do I ultimately be of the most service to patients, without creating harm and really assisting the process.
Yeah.
And so much of it was really wrapped around of not doing actually so much. You really are just a guide to sort of facilitate, and that everything that's transpiring is all part of the field to allow health to develop, but it's really an individual process.
Yeah.
And many times the way medicine is practiced is actually more creating a disservice and harm, even though I understand the concept of there's aspects, I think, to sort of reducing suffering even in
Yeah.
the moment around things. I get that, but I think it's without losing the bigger picture that ultimately there may be something larger that we're all working with. Like for me, when I had that problem with my arm, I tried lots of things, and at the end of it, I felt, it would have been a real disservice to me to have just gotten an adjustment and the pain went away, and I never got to actually see what lesson I was working with, what was coming up for me, what was being triggered, because who knows how that might have transpired in many other areas of my life if I didn't come to some sort of peace with that in that moment, right? So in my mind, it's like the body is always on your side. It's not
Yeah.
against you. It's really trying to provide information that if we are open enough to and introspective enough, that we can start to try and shine a light on it. And that's ultimately where I think a lot of the healing happens, because I feel like then we open up a new field that we just haven't even been able to access before.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. Like, we have to be compassionate. In some situations, the suffering is too great that the person is not open or able to navigate these more subtle zones. They literally need a reduction of inflammation, and that could be emotional inflammation. It could be whatever. They need to chill for a little bit, and they need to have a little space from their suffering, and then we could enter into the tough stuff. And on the other hand, so it's a balance, because on the other hand, the suffering provides the incentive for the ego to want to look at the cause to alleviate the suffering. I know myself, like, my ego was very developed and very happy with itself, that I wouldn't have looked at the things that I have looked at without some of the suffering that I had, which was tremendous at different times in my life.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's something to be said about the pressure cooker of suffering that I don't enjoy to see people doing, but I understand and I respect the process. And I ask them a question. Okay, so you have these symptoms. Are you okay if we don't alleviate the symptoms right away, and yet we work at the root, even if it takes a few months? And most of the time, people are on board with that. And now they've given the practitioner that sort of that leeway to work in a place that could be a little stressful, since we come from this mentality, you're the doctor and you have to help your patients stop their suffering right away, So
Yeah.
that works for me, that question. Do we have time? Can we do this? And if the person says, no, I really need some alleviation, I'll take that, give an appointment, and I'll see if we could do it spontaneously, like it would happen to me. And if not, then I'll do some other things. I'll offer some things to help bring that down a bit.
Yeah. And it's such an individual process. I mean, I feel like everybody's traveling through here and with different experiences that they're supposed to have. So,
Yeah.
and at different times. So, I mean, have you ever seen, sometimes you'll see a patient and you might bring something to awareness, and at the time they're like, oh, like, that's not for me. I've done that before. And then I've had that patient come back maybe 2 years later and go, do you remember when I was in and we talked about that? It goes, okay, I get what you're talking about now, and now I'm ready.
Yeah, I
So it's
totally,
like
yeah,
it depends on where we are at different points, and whether that's even something we're supposed to explore in this lifetime. Who knows?
yeah,
But one
yeah,
thing that was interesting when we talk about it, some of the work by Dr. Sarno, big mind body medicine physician. I think he actually passed away just a little while back. But
hmm,
um, I shouldn't say that. I don't know for sure. But Dr. Sarno wrote book like Healing Back Pain and the Mind Body um, Prescription, or the Mind Body Connection, or something like that. But
okay,
he basically talked a lot about the mind body medicine, and he believes like everything comes from up there. So in his back pain, he would actually tell people like, don't use anything else, because as soon as you do, you're sort of you're taking a side road rather than getting to what's actually at the root of it. And
100%. I agree with that 100%. And also because knowing people and knowing our culture, we're a quick fix culture. We're not a lot of time and reflection culture. Not everybody, but the
yeah,
general public, and population. So if we have these busy lives, and then we have these symptoms, and we do something and the symptoms are alleviated by what we do, how much reflection are we going to then really give to the underlying issue, which is important to understand at a broader level, like you were mentioning, all the implications through life. It's not just your back that's hurting, it's you're misunderstanding something about the nature of reality, which is important for each of us through our evolutionary process to return. Well, return is a misnomer, but to evolve, to remember who we are, which we've always been. We've never not been, but we've certainly gone on quite a long journey, which is meant to be. That journey of forgetting is meant to be, but there's also
yeah.
a call back. Like, hey, hello, I know you're out in the field, but come on home. Like, there is a call back. I really feel the call back is important. Even though we honor the journey itself at the same time. So there are paradoxes, there are these, there are paradoxes, and I think all kinds of paradox in life. And some people have a difficulty in the opposites that paradoxes are trying to bring together. I mean, some of the stuff that I love and do is based like the idea of uniting opposites. Like Kabbalah is this study of the unification of opposites. So is alchemy. And I mean, I'm sure we could talk for a long time on these topics. But certainly I think there's a flexibility in spirit that recognizes these seemingly disparate ideas that seem to oppose each other, but they actually can work together. They actually work together. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times I think they're just that flip side of the coin. They probably resonate in actually a very similar frequency, but they just look very different.
Yeah, yeah, well said. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, let's talk a little bit about your book, specifically around the philosophy and practice of naturopathic medicine. What drew you to want to write a book around that?
A great frustration with the 4-year program that of CCNM. So And it was better then than it is now. If I could just come out and say that, I think things have kind of worsened or distanced from our philosophy. So yeah, it was just basically like it was like a wish to put to put to paper the thoughts in where I saw the profession heading. And essentially, in a nutshell, it's naturopathic doctors trying to emulate conventional medicine in an attempt to be credible, and why I thought that was a bad idea. Ultimately, in a nutshell, we can one of the greatest determinants, if not the most important determinant of health, is being oneself. Now, that's different for
Yeah.
everybody. And everybody has a sense of their true self inside that we compromise, we forget, we suppress, we criticize based on our traumas and our life experience. So if the most important determinant for health is being true to oneself, as I've seen in my practice and for myself, my own process, then what's going on with a profession that's trying to emulate another profession and abandoning its own principles in order to be recognized or to seem credible? Like, to me, this is just a simple fact of this is a bad idea. And so I wrote about that to
Mhm.
encourage naturopathic students and doctors to remain true to our philosophy, because that's the subtitle. It's the revolution of naturopathic medicine, remaining true to our philosophy. Yeah, that's why I wrote it. And I basically, for 7 days, I got up every morning and I meditated and I got centered and I wrote nonstop all day. And then that was it. I was done after 7 days. I got it all on paper.
I like it when that kind of thing happens though, because it's like that's where it's that inspired action, you know? It's like you
Yeah.
can't help but not act at that point, and it's sort of just funneling through you when that stuff comes in. I think that's an important message because I mean, really, the founding philosophy of naturopathic medicine is a really beautiful art and practice of medicine. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
And which parts do you, when you look at naturopathic medicine currently, which parts do you feel are sort of becoming disjointed or disconnected from, and in what sort of way?
Well, there's man, there's a lot in this topic. Let me just see if I could fire them off at listing form. So first of all, the colleges are firing the elders. The elders are the keepers of the wisdom of the medicine. And so that's a big problem. You have young students, they're just graduating, and then they're being given positions of leadership in the clinic, and they have no experience. So that's just doing a disservice to the profession. There is a systematic getting rid of the philosophical aspects of the medicine. So everything now is being squashed into this very strong agenda of evidence-based.
Yeah,
And I think that we need evidence in our medicine, but there's a lot of different ways to have evidence. It's not all,
exactly.
yeah, it's not all in this prescription of what conventional medicine has defined as evidence-based. So that's just a problem, that where's the evidence for homeopathy? And so homeopathy is being gotten rid of, but there's tons of evidence. And even in the conventional way of
Hmm.
approaching homeopathy, there's evidence. For example, so the more vitalistic elements are being shouldered out of the profession, and the more conventionally acceptable medicines are being replaced. So there's that. There's the faculties of the colleges are making some pretty crazy choices these days of, like, CCNM. Bob Bernhardt, the president of the college, is training naturopathic doctors to reduce vaccine hesitancy around the coronavirus experimental mRNA vaccines. This is astounding to me. It's like, I can't even put into proper words how deeply compromising this is of what I hold dear and important for naturopathy.
Yeah. You know,
So these
Moshe,
are just some of
I remember when that letter came out by Bob Bernhardt from the college. And I remember reading it, and I understand where they were kind of going with it, but the part that particularly jumped out at me, that I had to sit down and write a letter to them that same day and to the OAND, because I thought it was way outside of what they should be doing, was the idea of trying to, and actually to convince vaccine hesitant
Right.
individuals to receive COVID vaccine.
Right.
That basically, if your naturopathic doctor supported it, then you'd be more likely to do it. So the part that bothered me about that was the convincing. And what I said
Yeah.
was that I'm not in the business of convincing my patients anything. I actually want to provide them information, and then in basically really try to let them take ownership of their own health. That's what we all ultimately want to do. We can be
Yes.
a guide, provide information, and support the direction that they are open to, but ultimately let them make that decision. It's not my job to convince anybody. And that was my main message when I wrote the letter, was just, when have we ever been in the business of convincing people to do anything?
Right.
So let alone something that, in my mind, I mean, doesn't have any long-term literature to support. I don't understand the process of convincing anybody around that. I would want to share information, let
Experimental.
people make their intelligent decisions around that. So that
Yeah.
part really frustrated me too. I wrote a letter at that point, because that was such, I think that was something everybody should have been writing letters about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you see students coming out, and they think homeopathy is pseudoscience. They're coming out of these colleges, our profession, like in North America, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they think homeopathy is pseudoscience because that's what one of their professors said it was. Like things like that. And certainly, as I'm passionate. I love homeopathy, but it's not just homeopathy. It's a package deal of the supplanting of the subtler nature-based, intuitive-based humankind as an intuitive being in a breathing, energetic universe, to evidence-based, molecular, mechanistic model of reality. And I suspect some overtaking of the colleges, by in the same fashion that the conventional medical colleges were taken over by big pharma, for instance. And the industry is trying to pull its agenda, like trying to morph the college to prepare the students to be the practitioners that they wanted to be,
Mm-hmm.
pushers of the nutraceutical versus, let's say the pharmaceutical. Although unfortunately, that's another thing that we see in naturopathic medicine, is the pharmaceutical ability. So yeah, it starts as, okay, it's good to have your pharmaceutical license. But then it becomes, okay, now you have to prescribe the antibiotic because there's this condition and it's very dangerous and you can't do anything about it except antibiotics. So it starts, in one way, and then it morphs into the other way,
Mm-hmm.
fortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember even going through school, and when I was going through, evidence-based became a really big hot topic around that time. Probably somewhere in that 2000 era, it was really starting to become a big thing, and people were going to, everything had to be evidence-based. And part of the controversy around that is, it's evidence-based, like you said, in a very specific way that defines evidence. And
Yes.
when you look at a lot of the elders and some of these people, I mean, there's such a wealth of experience that happens from just having clinical experience, being seeing things happen. Because I mean, if any clinician knows that when you read a paper and says, "Oh, this is the percentage that's going to get well from this," or these are what's, it's like, rarely does that ever roll over exactly the way the paper tells you in clinical practice, and it still becomes very individual. So
Yeah.
it kind of, I understand the necessity for certain things around evidence-based. I'm not saying evidence-based is wrong, but it's one part of a bigger piece. And if you separate that off and say, well, it's only evidence-based if it's done like this, you're negating a big part of what the profession offers.
Yeah. But is it like, what about empirical evidence?
Yeah.
Like, for some reason that's been dismissed, and it's I think in the history of our medicine, empirical evidence was an acceptable aspect. intuitive sense. You know, the practitioner has a deep sense of truth that resonates inside of them. That is another form of evidence, not necessarily that you would base everything on that, but it's an aspect that you would allow it to guide you towards something. And that's totally discredited in generally in that evident that
Yeah.
myopic evidence base that we're talking about. It's like everything is being redefined these days. Like even the World Health Organization is redefining things that you and I studied in science, the conventional sciences, about infection and infectiousness and immunity from having had a certain virus, and herd immunity. Now the definition of herd immunity involves when a certain number of people are vaccinated, not when a certain number of people have been infected. It's like there's a new speak happening now in science that's subtly manipulating us away from the heart and soul of what is, I think, the most healing path that we could be following.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting time right now with everything that's going on. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about in the past too is this concept of light in action, because there is sort of an aspect of stepping up into what this actually embodies. And this is something that we've talked actually with that Lemurian light shaman Huna Flash,
Yeah.
and he's brought up the term light in action. And so we're developing a whole series around this because I think this is a really important topic. And I think particularly right now, it always is, but I feel like whenever there's lots of stuff going on in the world, I think it's even more important to kind of step into and own that light in action ourselves. So
Yeah.
I'd like to throw that back to you. Just what does light in action actually mean to you?
Yeah, well, light is a principle of much closer to our true nature. And I say closer because I look at light as being like the higher aspect of ourselves, which is still a form of manifestness. It's a body. In the yogic tradition, it's the Ananda Maya Kosha, or the bliss body, or the causal body. So that's light. We like, as soon as we take form, the most subtle form of our form is light. So often people say I am light, and it's not untrue. It's true. Although I think even subtler is the absolute realm where we are pure consciousness, and there is no manifest state. It's just pure beingness. So the light, I love the light part because that's the first bit of tangibility of our nature. And light in action is that light is truth. Truth is emanating from our true nature, and therefore to carry forward truth through action means to have some impact on the world, to bring the world in towards a better place, a healthier place, a place of more harmony and love and joy and peace for people, so that this world can be a dwelling place of the fullest manifestation of our divine nature, a place, a dwelling place for the divine of who we are.
Mhm.
That's who we are. So action means to address those things which are not in harmony. Because if something is in harmony, it's already in harmony.
Mhm.
Let it be. Celebrate it. If there is ignorance, if there is turbulence, if there is a lack of abundance, and there's so many different walks that light can be in action. It could be in action in healthier ways and better ways of using waste systems and garbage collection, for instance, recycling. And it could be in medicine. So there's so many different ways, and that's on the individual level.
Yeah, absolutely.
That person knows their calling by, this is who I feel I am and what I want to do in this life. So I think that there's a lot of reasons, and I say reasons, I'm not saying they're true, but there's a lot of reasons to fear being light in action. It's scary. Like, the world doesn't necessarily encourage or support that. We're not rewarded for challenging the status quo. In fact, we're first opposed and sometimes you know,
Demonized or
demonized, ostracized, and at worst killed. That lingers in the consciousness of humanity. So it takes some courage, and it takes some honesty. Like, I've had to ask myself the question many times in the last year alone because of what's going on. If I don't do this, if I don't say this, if I don't bring forward this message, will I feel comfortable living with myself? And the answer has been no. And therefore, I did it for that reason. Although there was lots of discomfort and lots of ostracization and name calling and all kinds of weird stuff that occurred because I chose to bring a message which was not necessarily the spoonful of sugar, say, or the easy message, or the thing that everybody wants to hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you said a important part there around know your calling and courage. So when I think about this concept of light in action too, um, well, a couple things. I think to me, this has changed even what I've thought about as light, even in a lot of ways. Um, I mean, my philosophy has always been at the core of who we are. I really do think it is pure love. Like, I think that's kind of the essence of us.
Yeah.
But my idea of what that looks like in the world has changed over this last while. I used to think for the most part it was just kind of trying to stay up in a bit more of like a loftier place. You know, there was being cautious and aware of like judgmentalism and these types of things, but trying to stay in this sort of gentler place of
Mm.
love and appreciation, and you know, usually that means you're not in confrontation. You sort of step away from that, and you can kind of sit up there and almost in some ways not really be in the world so much.
Yeah.
And then how it's dawned on me the last while is when I think about, okay, well, what does pure love actually mean? And this has been from working with different people over the last year and different concepts around this and challenging my core beliefs on some of the stuff. But the one that makes the most sense to me now is that pure love really is living from that real, genuine, authentic place within yourself and acting in a natural way without censorship of yourself,
Yes.
without the need to constantly be censoring yourself for what you feel is where you currently are and what you're saying and how
Yeah.
you're feeling, and a natural reaction to things without having to sort of censor that to make it fit a certain group or a way that you're going to be presented.
Yes.
And there's something that feels so freeing about that concept, to just be in a place where you can really just be authentic with who you are without feeling like you need to censor everything, and that maybe in the process of having conversations that don't need to constantly be censored, that there's light that's going to come out of that there's conversation, there's more growth that's going to happen within all of that.
Yeah,
And so
definitely.
so then to me, that's a question I ask myself a lot of times now is, where do I feel like I'm censoring myself? Where do I feel like I'm on my own accord censoring, not being censored by somebody else, but myself, my internal process? Where do I feel like I need to censor how and what I'm saying in
Yes.
certain ways? And now when I think you're operating from that place of pure love, you're not operating from a place of malice or hurt. So it's not coming from that place. So it's coming from a very real place of love for self and others, but being authentic to that message and not censoring it.
That's
And that would be something I would put out to everybody, that we can all keep practicing that. So where do we feel like we're censoring ourselves, especially when that internal voice is actually not coming from a place of harm, right?
absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, there's so many issues around the throat of expression. So many people feel stifled in their expression.
Yeah.
They have low energy because their thyroid is off, and so they have low metabolism and, you know, fatigue, chronic fatigue. A lot of it centers around a lack of self-expression. And that, because our age is so information based, expression is almost like, you know, the new action. You know, like, expression is the new action. Of course, there is action as well. Like, you know, going and lending a person a hand who falls down, so to speak. That's action. Cleaning up garbage,
Yeah. Being
being
of
there for
service.
others. That's action. But sharing information is actually, I think, a form of enlightened action as well today,
Yeah.
especially because I feel like what we are experiencing today on the planet is a kind of a world war over the mind of humanity. So it's all around information. So I feel like it's not a frivolous, egoic need at this point. Like, I want to establish my giving of information for the good of humanity. It's actually quite important for our future that those who have their message to say speak that message in whatever way, again, they feel inclined to do. But certainly I think it's very important for people to be, you know, expressing themselves authentically. Again, that authenticity word comes down to being oneself without filter, without resistance, and
Hmm.
without hesitation. It's totally freeing. You just feel free because that's who we are. We are ultimately free.
Yeah. And you notice a lot of the fears and insecurities that shines a light on when we start to ask ourselves when we're not being that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's a really interesting. I mean, it's something I've been really focusing on a lot over this past year in a very different way than I think I did prior. I think you can kind of you can almost kind of play with it in a way that's not actually too threatening to the ego, and then you can really dive into it that is more threatening to the ego in a lot of ways where it actually um, is a lot harder sometimes to when you hit that resistance. It says, ooh, not too comfortable. And you'll see that in whatever it could be with presenting certain information, or sometimes just look within even your relationships. So much information comes up within our relationships. You even pick like a partner. Is there certain information that you just don't feel comfortable being yourself with your partner?
Right. That's
It's
true. Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
it's like most of this stuff starts at home. Really, that's where if you really want to challenge your lessons and see where you are, it starts from home.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to get your biggest resistance and your biggest challenges. So those are good places at first. If you feel like you constantly can't express yourself in the way that you're constantly censoring yourself to certain individuals in your life that you're with a lot of the time, that might be a good place to start the process of like, okay, well, what would that look like if I started to not censor myself quite so much? What would that feel like? And travel a little bit and see where you can open up the door a little bit in certain aspects of it.
Yeah. I think we have to accept the possibility of death on multiple levels to be authentic and to be light in action. So, example, in the relationship, a lot of people don't express themselves because they're afraid that they might anger the person, offend the person, they won't be liked, and the person will leave them,
Yeah.
i.e.,
Abandoned.
abandon, well, i.e., the death of the
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
Some people are afraid that if they speak up, they could literally be killed. They could literally
For
lose their
sure.
lives, as so many people have lost their lives by being a light in action. So many. It's terrible that's the case for this planet, but that's the way it is. And so there's some reason for that that's serving some higher purpose. Um, so we have to be prepared, I think. Just think to yourself, like, if I died doing this, would I be okay? And I hope the answer is yes, because ultimately I think that's the truth, that no, the process of being killed might be painful, but it's temporary. It might be very unpleasant. It could be very unpleasant, but it's temporary. And ultimately, when a person dies doing the right thing, I feel like there's something very beautiful about that. They're liberated in the most beautiful way possible. And part of me imagines like a person living in the shell of their fear. I should do this, I should do it, but they never act. They never do what their conscience is pushing them to do because they're afraid. And then they're going to die, whether sooner or later, but they have not died. Sorry, they have not lived. They've died not living. And it's like what Braveheart, in the movie
Yep.
Braveheart.
Yeah.
He says every man dies, but not every man really lives. And I think that there's something very beautiful about people. I feel so drawn with, like, love and appreciation and gratitude is really emanating deeply from within me towards people who are putting their careers on the line. The police that are standing up and losing their careers because they're speaking out against the tyranny, the medical doctors who are losing their licenses, naturopaths who are willing to be, you know, reprimanded by their organizations. I really feel a great sense of appreciation because they're the ones who are willing to put something on the line, and not just self-preservation. I don't think we really are living when we're living in self-preservation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you too, Moshe. Now, one other thing that you had talked about when we were kind of going through this prior was around faith. And you had said that your faith significantly increased when you accepted the presence of evil. I'm wondering if you can kind of shine a light on what you mean by that and how that kind of transformed faith for you and what faith even meant.
Yeah, that's cool. It's an amazing, for me, this is a very passionate topic. It's a very interesting topic. So, I think there's been infiltration in any possible walk of life. That's why we have to question everything. When I say infiltration of, let's say, misinformation, fake news, fake media, fake spirituality, in just about everywhere. So we have to really be discerning and ultimately trust the soul as the guide more than anything else.
Mm.
But I was influenced by new age media, and I thought, oh no, it's all good, it's all good. And I wasn't really accepting the idea that there are forces of evil. Now, we could talk about the role that evil has to play. I think evil has actually ultimately good role to play. But you have to be able to discern what is good from what is evil. Good is that which serves love, that which brings love, that which supports love. And evil is that which is undermining love, undermining, if we can use the word God. I mean, I'm comfortable with that word. I know not everybody is, but I'm comfortable using the word God. I'm not using it in a religious sense, but in a collective consciousness of intelligence, a divine being that is intelligent beyond our imagining, that has created us and that we come from and that we are. It's lots to say about that. So I wasn't acknowledging the presence or the existence of that, or I was like, I had a kind of new agey belief about it. So I watched this movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and it was actually a kind of a Hollywood production, but it's a true story that this woman had experienced possession. She had been possessed by demonic forms. And I've had experience in my practice where I get to a place where with a patient and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what we're dealing with right now. So I've seen it in practice. I've seen it with friends that I've had to intervene in certain times, and I know it's a real phenomenon now. But before, I was kind of in denial of it. So after I watched this movie, her message was she actually gave her life. She chose to be destroyed by them when she could have moved past that and moved into safety, as a message that these things are real, and she wants humanity to know that these things are real, not to scare us, but to help us realize. So when I said I got like this moment of revelation from her sacrifice, I knew the truth in it was very important. And I said to myself, holy smokes, I haven't been discerning enough. And now by recognizing the presence of evil, what actually happens is you separate the wheat from the chaff. You separate this big soup of neutrality, and the presence of the divine beings and our divine nature is separated from the dark forces on the planet. And my faith shot up off the charts, because I then could actually have a much greater relationship with the divine beings and the divine in myself, of course, which I wasn't having because I was allowing it all to coexist in a non-discerning soup of chaos without even realizing it. So that's how this helped me have discernment. The first, I would say, one of the first stages of discernment, because the discernment can grow, and
Yeah.
I think it has to grow because that becomes subtler and subtler. We're dealing with subtler and subtler forces. The most intelligent evil is the most subtle evil. The one that comes and hits you right in the head, is revealing itself, and by its revealing itself, it becomes obvious, and then you can deal with it, and so then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's the evil that is covertly operating under different guises, the wolf in sheep's clothing. You know what I mean? Like, these are the things
Yep.
that we're dealing with today.
Well, and that I remember, and I might have talked to you about this before. I've mentioned this before in different interviews, but I remember Dr. David Hawkins in his teachings from Power versus Force and many other teachings. He was a pretty main spiritual teacher for a long time. And he would talk about the reality of the Luciferic energy and the satanic energies. And he would basically say to be aware of it, but don't sort of engage it. It's like moments diving into that can be lifetimes of sort of suffering and pain. So you don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to go and be a part of it, but to be aware of it. And how he talked about the Luciferic, he said a lot of times the Luciferic was even more dangerous than the satanic because it was more elusive. It was what basically inverted truth and falsehood. So it would so what you would actually be false would be perceived as being true, and what would be true would be perceived as being false. And so that has gone through my head a lot around stuff, especially in the worlds of information and misinformation. And he would say that the mind, the brain, cannot discern truth from falsehood. And we can, so to me, it's not the job of the brain to do that. It's the job of the spirit, of the heart, of
Yeah.
sometimes the gut instincts. It's a different aspect and a different type of sense that we want to try to connect with. Because the reality is I mean, I remember interviewing like Dr. Eric Rifkin, and he wrote a book called The Illusion of Certainty, and he breaks down just all of the same research, all the conventional research on so many of the different preventative screening tests that we use for things, everything from mammograms and colonoscopies and you name it. He breaks it all down and shows what the actual numbers are on the risk prevention, which is next to nothing. And I would say if you haven't ever heard that, go check out his book, The Illusion of Certainty. And there's actually several other books that have been written along those lines, because he shows how stats get manipulated. And it's all in this switch from originally looking at things from an absolute risk reduction to a relative risk reduction, and that changes everything. And so he takes exactly the same papers, but he says, this is what it looks like when you look at it from a relative risk. This is what it looks like when you look at it from an absolute risk, which is what is supposed to be used to make informed decisions. And so he kind of shows how but if you don't know how to read literature, scientific literature, which most people don't, you're just going to be totally, wolf in sheep's clothing type of thing.
Yeah.
So in a way, connecting back to the body and some of the stuff that we've talked about earlier here too, I think is so essential to have a different sense of even evidence for ourselves. We have to have like certain markers on how do we start the process of trying to discern truth from falsehood, or good from evil in certain ways. So to me, it's all kind of tied into the same thing. And maybe there's an aspect where that the scientific literature could be a piece of that, but it's not the whole thing. And if we only use that and discard all this other part, I think we are going to be led down a different path very easily. So we want to try to incorporate as many of the different faculties that we have access to.
Yeah, for sure. And what you said about, inverting truth and falsehood, never have I seen that being done so blatantly lately. So for me, it's blatant. For someone else, they might not see it at all. And I think it would be interesting to see and interview people and just see where they at. Like, do they Are they aware of the possibility that there are evil forces operating? So you could look at it just as some people who desire power for themselves. That's it. It's not actual evil. And you could get into a debate about that. It's a fun
Well,
debate.
or like I remember like Dr. Christiane Northrup talking about it, and she said, think of it as like the narcissist or sociopath. She said about 1%, like 1 out of 100 people is a sociopath. So it's like,
Yes.
if you kind of think of it from that point of view, it is very it's very self-based, right?
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
very self-serving as opposed to a more open global kind of humanity serving. So if you kind of just nail it down to that, if sometimes these terms, I mean, sometimes it's semantics. People have different relationships with words. So if you don't like the terms good and evil or truth and falsehood, or kind of think of it in terms of that, because maybe that, sometimes if anybody's been in a relationship with a narcissist or a sociopath, you can pretty quickly, it's almost like when people go, well, I would never understand why they would do that. You're not supposed to, because you're not a sociopath. So you
Right.
probably won't
Exactly.
totally get it. It won't make sense to you because thank God you're not actually in that same situation.
But which absolutely. And yet I do want to emphasize something that what I've said to a number of people, and I've also heard a number of people say to me, totally independently, it all boils down to good against evil in this day and age. And I actually identify with that. I actually think that that's a reality, because having studied the mechanics of the people that are behind the falsehoods of the fake news and the fake information that are manipulating us to serve their, whatever it might be, sociopathic or narcissistic tendencies, I think they actually identify as Luciferian and satanic. I don't know which one they are, like whether they're one or they're both or whatever, but ultimately, I believe not everybody, it's not like anybody who's following in the agenda.
For sure.
Most people are just following orders and discounting their instincts of what you're emphasizing. Their instincts are saying no, but then they're letting their fear lead them by the nose, and so they're acting out of fear. But the uppity ups at the very top, they actively have, I think, an allegiance with those forces that they clearly identify with. So it's not like, in the different, I think the different religions are manifestations of the divine in all the different beautiful ways that the divine manifests. And a shaman and a Sufi and a Jew and a Christian could
Yeah.
sit down and all see the universality of the truth and love each other's individual expression. Well, all those energies kind of coalesce into this oneness, which is love. But there's this other energy, which is to usurp the throne of that love. And that's the oppositional energy. And they're actually worshiping and supporting that form. And therefore, it's about, control of humanity, not the liberty of humanity. It's
Mhm.
about subjecting people and removing them from their soul and their spirit, not helping them connect to their soul and their spirit. It's
Yeah.
about a false form of medicine that disempowers people and poisons them and kills them, not a medicine that helps people know who they truly are and that they're empowered. They have all the power within them to heal most of the things that we're facing today.
Well, and Moshe, that brings up a good question. How does someone, so to break them down for people, because sometimes when you're in the mix of all of it, it's hard to like, it gets sticky. You're trying to pull yourself out to be able to have a clearer picture of what's going on.
Yes.
So it probably would be helpful for people like to know, what does it feel like when information is coming from a place that is more in line with information or people, whoever you're talking to, whatever, that's more in line with, say, truth and more of this pure love consciousness, as opposed to something that's more in line with falsehood and the opposite of that. How can someone start to discern the difference? What is there, a sensation that you feel? Is there something you can experience in your body? What are some of the, I know what, and I'll share what mine are for me after, but I'm asking you from your point of view, what goes on in your body when, Or how do you know the difference? Because I think that's helpful for people to start to question and pay attention to how things feel inside themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a beautiful way of directing the conversation. You know, part of the answer for that is that you screw up. You know, you have this feeling and you don't trust your intuition. And there you take a choice which you know you shouldn't. And you're like, damn it. I never want to do that again. I never want to not listen to what I knew was true. And then through that painful process of dismissing ourselves, you know, dismissing our instinct, we get this conviction to not do that anymore. And that strengthens the conviction of listening to our intuition, which then speaks louder and louder and more obvious. So the way I experience it is just a sort of a sense of feeling that feels like a knowing that feels like a feeling. It's a sense. And is that always right? Here's the tricky part. No. But and here's where it gets a little subtle and nuanced. Like in the movie The Matrix, when Neo is about to meet the Oracle, Neo asks Morpheus, and she's always right. And I love what Morpheus says. He says, try not to think of it in terms of right and wrong. She is a guide, Neo. She can help you to find the path. And sometimes we find the path by following something that actually is very hard. It's a very, like you might even say that was wrong, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of subtle nuances. It's not black and white. We learn by mistake. We learn by not trusting ourselves, and that becomes stronger. We learn by trusting ourselves, and that re-emphasizes it. And then also, you know, geez, just from experience and listening and being, you see, I think, let me say this, and then I'm happy to hear what you have to say about this, Jason. But I think that people have to accept the possibility that those in authority don't have always their best interest in mind. If people can get past that and start to discern everything, listen to, question everything, that's an important process, because if you just believe at face value what the quote unquote authorities are saying, then you don't develop your intuition, and you really don't question, and you don't have even the option coming on the table of what is my gut saying about this. You're just blindly consuming what's being given to you. And I think, if there's a karma, humanity's karma is that right now. It's don't just listen to authority without questioning what they're telling you. Because who is the ultimate authority?
Yeah.
It's the divine that's living in each individual sovereign being that we all are. That's the authority. So question authority, that helps develop it too. Don't just, I already said it. So
yeah, I well, and that would be one of the foundational ones for me too. When, at least in my experiences, and I have to still go back and sometimes check my underlying beliefs around things, and because those are going to shade how I feel about certain things. So you're still wanting to kind of be open and be curious all the time, I think, anyways, and be open to your perspective being able to change depending on certain feelings, certain experiences, certain information that resonates in certain ways. It's like, you got to be able to flow, like water.
yes.
But the things that generally come up for me, if I feel like I kind of get an meter like, nah, don't resonate with it, don't really care for that. It's if something comes up and it feels anything that has this sort of stronger judgmentalism, like a strong judgmentalism feeling, like this is good, this is bad, in a angry kind of a way. Now it can still be very And like I think of people like Martin Luther King or Desmond Tutu. I mean, they can be very strong, but it comes from a different place. It doesn't
Like
come from a place.
authority. It's speaking
Yeah,
with
and there could
authority.
even be connected to almost like a righteous anger, which could be still beneficial. I remember
Yes,
Dr. Northrup saying righteous anger actually raises your immune system. So there's got to be something beneficial about that.
yes,
And I think Desmond Tutu said, if you see a child being abused, you should get angry. It's there
yes,
to muster you to action. So
yes,
I think there's a place for that, but it's being aware of it when it comes from a place that starts to move towards like hatred, violence, something like that. That's where you want to be careful of it.
yeah.
When I'm experiencing something that doesn't resonate from a place that's more of truth or love, it feels constricted. I feel right away, I feel like my body goes like this as opposed to feeling like I'm opening and expanding.
That's
Mhm.
good.
There
Right,
would be
exactly.
sensations of being manipulated. And if you've ever been in relationships where that's happened and you start to get a sensation of what that energy feels like, you can pick it up in other places if you've ever been manipulated in some ways or sort
Yes,
of, even cunningly coerced.
yes,
And I would say one of the big ones would be this like savior mentality where you are putting your authority outside of yourself into somebody else's hands. To me, it's like whenever there is a message that tells me that I am not sort of as my own sovereign being capable of managing my own life or something that's going to restrict that capacity for me or for my family, that right away causes me to kind of feel like that doesn't resonate. That doesn't feel like it's a part. It doesn't feel like it's a part of the natural order of things. It's like
yes,
if you left it in the hands of how would nature actually do things, those seem opposite to how nature would function. And so
yeah,
to me, a lot of it comes back to how would it just evolve naturally? How does nature run its course with certain things? And it's not restrictive. It's sort of, it comes and it goes and it's
yeah, yeah,
and there's an ownership of your own authority. I feel like that's like you had mentioned, to me, that's kind of the final piece. So on any end of it, and you see this everywhere, this is where you get these extremes where it's like, well, over here you're giving away to authority, or over here you're following certain people that are saying things and you're believing them for everything they say, and they could be taking you down a road too. It's like
right.
ultimately it's to guide you back for you.
Controlled opposition, right?
Yeah, it's
There's
it's
the
really to all bring you back so that you start to question and really try and get an idea from an individual basis, like what is your truth? Like where do you really feel and stand on certain things?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I so support that. And in the top of the inversion of truth, um, the wolf in sheep's clothing, we have a lot of people falling prey to this because the the people who are behind it, whether they're sociopaths or technocratic, psychopaths, whatever, they are clever and they study psychology and they know how to manipulate people and they do studies. Like for instance, certain of the Ivy League schools were doing studies around what will reduce vaccine hesitancy the most. Is it guilt that you're a bad citizen? Is it you're protecting humanity? What message should they bring that will most coerce people into swallowing the Kool-Aid? And the answer is, I think, is you're protecting others.
Yeah,
So, because that's the reason that a lot of people are doing it is to protect others, because that's a good thing, but that's how the evil can misuse itself. And I think that is one of the definitions of how evil acts, is it takes on the guise of something that's false for a negative purpose, but it seems positive. So
yeah,
people are being encouraged, oh, you're protecting others, wear your mask, you're protecting others, have your shots, But if you really think for yourself and you do your own research, there's plenty of information out there that counters that narrative as actually true. That you're not actually helping people by taking shots. In fact, you might be making it worse for people
mhm.
because of there's lots of factors there that we could talk about, but I've seen quite a few reasons for that. And so on and so forth about that. So to be highly discerning, to recognize the fact that not everything is as what it appears to be, to look for the hidden agenda, even in some mainstream, even in movies that look like they're educating you to reveal the darkness that's going on. They have some hidden agendas. I've done a few commentaries on that. There was a movie that came out about, it's on Netflix. It's about how people are falling for these fake conspiracy theories, or that we're just so divided today. But then their agenda was to make it look like, that's that anti-vaxxers. That's the people that believe in, that the climate change is a hoax. So the ultimate agenda was to dismiss those things as just being part of this phenomenon today of people believing anything they're told. That was the ultimate hidden agenda. So there's a lot of hidden agendas that are abounding, and we have to be very discerning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and my feeling now around all of this stuff is, it's like, kind of like we talked about earlier, I'm really not in the market here to try and convince anybody of anything. I think people need to make their own sovereign decision on what makes sense to them and where they are. And I really do think everybody's just going to play a part that is larger than what we are doing here in this one little spot that we can see at this point, when there's this big picture ultimately unraveling.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, my part of my light in action, I feel like, is to just share information in a way that resonates with me, that I think needs to be heard, and let people sift through this and figure out where they want to go. And if
Yes.
there's, and I'm not trying to convince anybody. So if information around this doesn't resonate with people, then it's not for you. Go listen to something else that resonates with you. But if there's information around this that people are open to and they are looking for, and it's helping them make certain decisions, then this is probably who's going to be served by it, right?
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I also think that using that principle, there's something that's happening today which is in violation of our rights to choose for ourselves, that I feel very passionate about. Sometimes it dips even in that righteous anger, or in that
Yeah.
fiery feeling like, okay, this is really not right. And I want to speak about this in no ambiguous terms, because I absolutely agree with you so wholeheartedly that ultimately everybody should choose for themselves. It's when we're not allowed to choose for ourselves that then we're in a serious problem of humanity, and that's where we're moving.
Well, this is the whole idea around medical freedoms and forced mandates and these types of things. I mean, that, to me, that fundamentally goes against humanity in my regard. It's like we should have free choice for ourselves and for our kids. That's a premise that humanity is built on. So
Absolutely.
against it just doesn't seem to make, and to me, it's like, I would think everybody on some level should question that when fundamental freedoms are taken away. So,
Right.
but
But it's been astounding to see how many people are justifying those freedoms being
well,
taken away.
I think this is, like I was talking to you earlier, one of the series that we want to put together is something on the illusion of free choice, because in so many ways, and I mean, it's like it goes so deep, really, in so many ways, that we have sort of been conditioned and programmed through culture and through media and through, I mean, you name it, and it's just gone generation. So it's like, we don't
Right.
even realize in so many
Yes.
ways, even when we are making quote unquote free choices, that they're actually not quite as free as you think you are. It's almost like if your choice was kind of figured out from here, and all of the steps that would take place to eventually arrive you here. In many ways, even when we think we are making free choices, either based on how we've been conditioned to believe and all of these different things, that we're not really quite so free. We're only really free choosing, I think, as we remove those restrictions, we remove those programs, and we really connect back to that really pure love, authentic part of ourself, that source. Then I think we make free choices based from that place. Ultimately, is
For sure.
my
And by the
perspective.
way, that's what the movie that I remember, the Netflix movie. It's called The Social Dilemma. Have you
Oh,
seen
okay.
that?
I haven't seen it, but I know which one you're talking about.
But they just show you how there's all these like algorithms that based on one choice, they present you the next choice, and you think you're choosing it, but you're actually it's being chosen for you, and you don't even discern that this is what's happening. So they're really revealing on the one hand something important for people to see when the hidden agenda is coming on with the other hand. And so that's important to balance that. I thought you were talking about the illusion of free choice. It's like I guess there's multiple ways of looking at it, because one of
Yeah.
the ways that I look at that is the idea of the fact that we actually don't have free will at all, but we think we have free will. That's a very spiritual, yogic, Kabbalistic topic that I love. I wrote another book called the last four books of Moses. It's the book one of a series that I was writing, and the subtitle is The Letting Go of Free Will,
Hmm.
because ultimately when we realize that free will, we have it, but it's not really real, then we ultimately let it go. That's the total mastery level. That's when you see the servant has totally laid down their will, and they have accepted the true will within them, which is their will, but it's not the small self will
I was
anymore.
just going to say, this sounds like the full surrendering of the ego self to the divine self, or the self
That's
with the
right. That's
capital
it.
S.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly.
Well, that actually might be a good discussion. Maybe we'll do for that series. We'll talk about that, because I think that would be a that would be a really good one to get into a lot of details around too. Yeah.
I'd love to talk about that. I find
Yeah,
it a
because there's that,
fascinating
and there's
topic.
like all these other pieces around how what we think we are making free choices are actually programmed in many ways. So we're going to talk to people about how beliefs specifically, we're going to talk about, I want to try and get around how like media and all these things create an environment where we are being sort of programmed without totally knowing it, just so that
Yeah.
it draws some awareness around it for people to then question. Because if you don't have awareness around it, you will never question it. And
Right.
so with
Right.
awareness opens up the door, you know. And then the other part around the free choice, even this idea of sort of destiny versus free will, and these sorts of ideas too, which have come up in different episodes before. So I find it all really fascinating conversation. And for me, I just like having conversations about all sorts of stuff, because I feel like in the conversation creates the openness to think differently, to stretch the boundaries of our box a little bit, and see what resonates, see what doesn't. Right? It's like I
I
said,
agree.
we're not trying to convince anybody of anything, but we should be able to have interesting conversations and then see what that brings up for people.
I agree. And I think some of the most interesting conversations that, like, for instance, the intellect, for me, the most interesting, like, that you're seeing, like, in the intellectual dark web with, like, Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and some of these very interesting thinkers these days are, the attitude is one of openness and sharing to learn from each other and to grow, rather than this idea like we're trying to argue to establish what the truth is because it's already been established. Something that I'm reluctant to say I've learned, because I'm learning. Let me say I'm learning. Is that humanity has never been here before. This is the first moment. I mean, maybe in some other
Mhm.
weird sci-fi
Sure.
reality, we
Yeah.
have been here before, right? But I mean, right now we are learning as we go along that things are changing with each subsequent change. Like a butterfly does this in
Yeah.
Mozambique, and then that chain reaction. Now I'm thinking something different because you said it, and then we're growing as a humanity in the moment. We're changing, we're learning and growing in the moment, and these conversations provide those ripple effects that is altering the course of the future.
Yeah, I find them really interesting, and they're fascinating. And um, I ultimately think, it's like everybody should have the choice to make their own decisions on things. And I mean, that's really it's like to me, it's like it's so funny that we're even needing to talk about that, because I feel like that's so fundamental.
Yeah.
But um, you know, should be able to, you're adults, you should be able to hear different information and pick and choose what you like and have, I mean, it's the way it used to be done way back in the day. You'd have these, the Socratic sort of method. You'd have conversations around lots of stuff and just sort of see what would come up.
I think there's a real wisdom in that, Jason, in honoring free will. And it also calls into question some practices that we could get ourselves into in medicine that are too influential of the direction of a person's life by the choice that the practitioner makes. I had this very interesting experience. I worked with a woman who had severe bipolar. She considered herself kind of crazy by her own definition. And we worked together, and I think it was partially the holistic counseling dialogue that I did with her and partially a remedy I suggested. She became very integrated and highly psychic. Like, I've never seen someone so psychic, where she was channeling information for people of homeopathic remedies of substances she'd never heard of before. That's a pure channel, right? Because usually it's like, you use, like, in the mind uses what it knows. It's because it's being guided to say,
she's
talk
bringing
about
in
this.
new information. Yeah,
It's purely new information. And she realized that she was tapping into such a deep level of source information that she stopped doing it because of this very principle of interfering with people's free will. And that blew me away. That was like an incredible thing that she's probably one of the most gifted psychics around. And she stepped away from her gift because it was too influential of a person's choice. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that totally just goes right back to what we talked about almost at the beginning when I was asking Abraham that question around how to do the least amount of harm and do the most amount of service and good for patients. And it was that question, it was around that if, sometimes doing too much is actually a big disservice to people too. So
Yes.
yeah, that was fascinating, Moshe. I know we're coming up on time here. So where can
Sure.
people learn more about the work you're doing? Where's the best place to send people to learn about all the different stuff you're doing? I know you've got a counseling program. You've got a
Yeah.
couple different things that you're doing.
Well, what right now, what I would most like to put out is that they could reach me at my website of my program. It's a certification program of holistic counseling. So it's holistic without a W, HOLISTIC dash, minus sign, counseling with one L.ca. So they could reach me there. They could also just do a search for Moshe Daniel Block, Naturopathic Doctor. I come up in all kinds of ways if they wanted to chat or work with me. My greatest interest right now is to train people to do the holistic counseling process, because it is this very beautiful process of helping a patient get to understand what the truth is in themselves. So it's asking these non-directional questions. That's the difference with what I've seen is a lot of common counseling psychology is there's a body of knowledge, and the counselor and psychologist learns that, and then they apply that knowledge by providing the information to the patient, instead of having the patient say, oh, that's why I feel that way. I see why I feel that way. And then the healing happens within the person, which is very in keeping with our philosophy. The healing power of nature, it occurs in the patient, not from the practitioner. Sure, we play a role, but that role is as guide, facilitator, So that's how I'd like to have people contact me, especially practitioners that would like to learn this method, which I would love to have them a part. It's a deep program where there's a lot of physician heal thyself that goes on, because it's not just like, oh, here's a method, apply it. You can't get away from your own stuff, because where a practitioner is blocked is where they will be blocked in helping others. So it's a full circle kind of program.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Daniel. I think that's also why when we talked earlier on that it's moving more and more away from some of the core principles, because I do feel in some ways, in many ways, it's easier to just say, well, give this or this or this or this for this condition, go. There's not really, to do the kind of medicine that you're talking about, there is a interaction between doctor, patient, there is this entanglement process that takes place. And so ultimately, the field that gets developed for healing to take place is very much a dynamic process that is directly relation to where the practitioner is. And so
Right.
you have
And
to
it's
have
for the
done,
practitioner.
absolutely,
The practitioner is getting healing too, and that's important to
yeah,
acknowledge. The Course
yeah,
in Miracles really
yeah,
emphasizes that.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a great text. My wife and I have done the Course in Miracles as well, and yeah, foundational stuff. So I will make sure I've got your links in the show notes so that people know where to connect with you, and
Yeah.
we'll
Thank you.
do something for that other series. I think that'll be a really interesting concept, talk around free will. So Daniel,
Fabulous.
awesome chatting with you again. I look forward to doing it again in the future.
I had a blast. I really enjoy your style, and the I feel like we did exactly what we said we love doing. We built on each other's comments, and there a lot of beautiful stuff was shared. Thank you for holding the space for this, Jason. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.